What do you think of when you hear the names Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King Jr., and the Dalai Lama?
Hmm. When I think of these humanitarians, I think of love and compassion.
Exactly. People whose compassion flames so bright that people all over the world still feel inspired by them.
Not only that, but they had the unique ability to connect with everyone.
You're right. It reminds me of a passage in the book The Prophet where it says, "It's when you give of yourself that you truly give." There are those who give little of the much which they have, and there are those who have little and give it all. Through the hands of such as these, God speaks, and from behind their eyes, he smiles upon the earth.
Soul Vibes.
Welcome to Soul Vibes. I'm Arthi.
And I'm Sanjeev
Then
Nirankari.
Nirankari. When I think of someone like Mother Teresa, I feel these vibes of compassion. I think of someone who really feels for others, someone who takes action for others.
And Artiji, that's what compassion really is, that feeling or concern you have for somebody else.
Sanjeevji, earlier you mentioned that these humanitarians were able to connect with everyone. It really makes me wonder, can you have compassion without connection? Before we begin our conversation, let's hear from 10-year-old Sean Watwani, who shows us what compassion can look like at school.
When I was in second grade, my class got the idea of having a buddy bench. Its purpose was that if a kid was lonely or had nothing to do during recess, he or she could sit on it and another kid can go and play with him or her. The main goal was to make sure that every kid on the playground had someone to play with. To make the principal agree, we had to find a way to make it as cheap as possible. And once the principal agreed, we had to wait months for the bench to come. Now I am in 5th grade, and I see kids using the buddy bench. This makes me happy because I can see that kids use it and more people have friends.
A buddy bench. So if a child feels lonely, other children will see them on the bench and then come play with them. Sanjeevji, what a beautiful example of compassion. Clearly, these kids understand and care so much that they don't want any child to feel left out.
This is amazing, Artiji. I'm reminded of an incident where we went for a parent teacher meeting for my son. His teacher started by saying that during the month of Thanksgiving, they asked a question to all the kids: what gift you want to give on Thanksgiving? So kids, as expected, replied they want to give chocolates, candies, soft toys, Xbox. But out of nowhere, your son said he wants to give the gift of blood donation. Gift of blood donation from a kindergarten student? Never heard of. Tell me what you guys do. So I told her, Vivan is a member of Sant Nirankari mission, and we host blood drives twice a year. And we ask these kids to distribute cookies and juice to all the donors. And I'm sure he must have seen the joy of giving on the face of donors and from where he picked it up.
You know, the kids are so innocent. Many times they don't even need a connection to feel for someone. And if you think about it, compassion is such an intrinsic human value, and it seems to come so naturally for the kids because compassion is who they are. But Sanjeevji, sometimes it feels like as we get older, maybe we get so absorbed with ourselves, be it our school life, our career goals, that we fail to notice the needs of others around us. And it's almost like we begin to rationalize even something so innate as compassion. Like, my own plate is full and that's not my problem. Or I don't know them. Or I don't have the time to help.
That's true. Actually, we are so busy in our day to day life that it becomes that, oh, this is not part of my job. When I was in Grand Central Station, New York, it's a big station, and finding an elevator is kind of very difficult task there. So I came out of the train, I saw an old lady. She was carrying a big suitcase and she wanted to go upstairs. So it was difficult for her. I just went to her and asked her, "Ma'am, can I help you?" And I picked up the suitcase, went upstairs. When she came there, she hugged me and started giving compliments. "Oh, you are God sent. You are an angel. Thank you so much." And I was like, was it such a big of a deal? I mean, picking up that suitcase, taking it 5 stairs up, it's not at all a big deal, right? But it made me think what we have done to humanity. Am I so busy in my chores that I don't even notice? Or I kind of, I'm more of tempted towards ignoring like what's going around me. I want to know, like, what will I do if my mom is in the same position? Will I still ignore or will I go and help her?
You bring up a good point, Sanjeevji. What if I know that person? Does that make a difference? And I think compassion does come easier when we feel connected to each other. And sometimes our experiences give us that connection. If we think for a moment back on our challenging moments in life, be it a loss, a heartbreak, the death of a loved one, now, if we see someone else in that same situation, I think that compassion will flow automatically and there will be a connection to their pain. What I'm trying to say is, we feel more for a person when we've been in their shoes.
That's so true. If I have gone through the pain, I understand it much better. There is a sister in New York, and she's a cancer survivor. She knows that she won't be able to donate blood, but whenever we have these blood drives or cancer awareness events, she is always in the front line. She says, "I understand what it means to go through this pain, whenever you are going through cancer or your family member is going through cancer." So I'm sure having that connection makes you more compassionate.
Joining us now is Natasha Harpalani. Years ago, Natasha helped start an effort to send pacemakers to patients in India who might not be able to get the device otherwise, all while she was still a high school student. Welcome, Natasha.
Hi, Arthi. Thank you so much for having me.
Can you tell us how this all started?
When I was a sophomore in high school, my grandfather was sick and he needed something known as a pacemaker. So I did what any intellectually curious kid would do, and I Googled and I tried to learn everything I could about the device. Finally, I came across a project where people were collecting pacemakers from local funeral homes and crematories and then donated them to the patients of India. I got in contact with the physicians that were starting these efforts, and they told me just reach out to the funeral home owners and crematory homeowners and start collecting. So I did that, and many of them said, we'll get back to you later, or, we'll talk to you soon. So I knew that if I wanted to collect the pacemakers, I really had to make it legit. So I put together a pamphlet, some PowerPoint slides, learned the statistics about why people can't afford the devices, and it's really because the patients otherwise would not be able to afford them. And I started what's today known as Keeping Pace. And finally, one crematory home owner said, if you can be here in 20 minutes, I have 2 pacemakers for you. And that is how I collected my first 2 devices.
Some people may have given up making those phone calls after those initial rejections and said, well, I had my heart in the right place, but it just didn't pan out. Why did you keep calling the funeral homes after those initial rejections?
I think it's because I was so lucky that my grandfather, he needed the device. Our family stepped in. We got him the device as soon as possible. But if all I had to do was make phone calls and get these owners to agree to help me with this project, I figured I can put a little bit more effort. And so I just persevered a little bit more. People told me no. I said, okay, let me have them take me seriously. And I just couldn't imagine that someone else's grandfather or someone else's loved one would go without the life-saving device.
It's interesting. The word compassion has the word passion in it. And we were just talking about how sometimes the connections we have to certain people or experiences makes us more compassionate. Do you think that the experience with your grandfather was a catalyst for why you started the charity Keeping Pace?
Absolutely. I think the experience with my grandfather exposed me to what pacemakers do and how helpful they are in regulating heartbeat. I also think it's this idea that my grandfather could afford the device, but what if he couldn't? And so, in any situation, whatever cause I've cared about has always been because of a little bit of a personal connection. And realizing like I can do a small act every day and it can have an impact on someone that maybe I don't even really know.
I know you continue to volunteer to help people in your local community, and your story and Sean's, which we heard earlier, are examples of how compassion can really be shown at any age. And it's just so beautiful. Is there any message you'd like to share with our listeners?
I think going back to our conversation, innately we are all compassionate. I look to my friends, I look to my family. We are all people that care about other people. We care about causes. And I think it's about taking it one step further and acting on what we care about. The message that to be taken away from Keeping Pace is to help teenagers and adolescents identify what cause it is that they really care about. And I think that is a really great starting point in getting involved in your local community. I cared about the patients and their families that didn't have access to medical devices. And that is basically the idea that this is what I cared about, and I can find a way to act on that compassion.
Thanks, Natasha. Stay blessed and continue to be a blessing to others. We continue the conversation after this song by Michael Jackson, sung by Sadhika. We were talking about how feeling connected to people helps us be more compassionate. But there's one connection we all share. Sanjeevji, we're so blessed that in Satsang, we are given God realization or self realization, really, this understanding that we are all one. We're all children of the same one God. Each of us is an extension of the same super soul. And with this divine understanding, Now, there's no other, just as there's no I. Those barriers separating us are eliminated. And we realize that we're all connected, we're all one.
That is so true, Atiji. There are no others. When I have that in my mind, that there are no others, everyone else is a part of me. We just heard Natasha's story. And it reminds me how Babaji always encourages us to work for a cause and not for applause. That gives me a reminder that I'm not the doer. And I'm not doing any favor when I'm doing something which is a part of me. Like, how five fingers are there, and if one finger is hurt, other finger feels that pain. Think of a world where 7 billion of us caring for one another. How beautiful this world would be. It will be a one big, large, global family. And we have to remember that compassion is not a luxury, it's a necessity of the time. I'm reminded of an incident where Chacha Pratap Singh ji, he went to Baba Guru Vachan Singh ji and he started looking at him. Babaji asked him, Pratap Singh, what are you looking at? And he said, I read in scripture that arms of Guru are very long. So I'm looking at your arms. Listening to this, Babaji started smiling and he said, all you saints are my arms. Think of it that we are the instrument in fulfilling God's desire, God's work. And these efforts doesn't have to be really big. They can be small gestures, like making a simple phone call, holding someone's hand, providing a listening ear. I volunteer at a senior service center, and just sitting there and listening to them, it makes a huge difference. These are all examples of compassion.
Well said, Sanjeev ji. Another example comes to mind. Remember in 2018, there was that gunman who shot people at a synagogue in Pittsburgh, and the doctor leading his care also attended synagogue. And when he was interviewed by reporters, the doctor said, my job isn't to judge him. My job is to care for him. He's some mother's son. I remember this was all over social media at the time with the word compassion. And it just makes you wonder, imagine if we see every child as our own child, or every person as some mother's son or daughter. Then, just like we heard in the song, it would heal the world.
That's right. Compassion makes us feel good too. How can we be happy if our brothers or sisters are in pain? What Mataji is giving us. Isn't she telling us that we all came from the same source? So each one of us are connected. Be it a kid who wants to donate blood. They may not be aware of the connection, but connection is still there. It becomes my second nature to go out of the way to offer, to make somebody's cheerful, to bring smile to his face, to share the pain.
Exactly. And we can't help every single person, but I believe we can be a light for the people we come across in our daily life. And that's what we see in Nishi's story.
Mom was in the hospital, comatose with all organ failures. I was sitting all by myself in the middle of night in the ICU waiting room when these two ladies came by, sat next to me, crying profusely. I couldn't hold myself, went to them, and asked them how I can help. They told me that their father were very ill, on the verge of death, and they had to make very tough decision, and they do not know what to do and how to come to that conclusion. I asked them if it is okay if we can all do prayer together, and they looked at me and they said yes. All three of us held our hands together, and I started to do Simran. At that very moment, they do not know what I was saying. They did not understand what I was saying. And we kept our hands held so tight and we kept doing Simran. Did not know for how long did we do our Simran. Then we were interrupted shortly and then they had to go back to see their father. Few hours later, they came back. They hugged me and they thanked me and they said that their father is out of danger and now they can go home at peace. I was sitting in the waiting room and see them both coming back again. I asked them what happened. Why are they back in the waiting room again? I thought they were going back home. They said that on the way back to the car, they were kept thinking about me and my mother. And this time around, they came back and they wanted to do some prayers for my mother's well being. And if it is okay for them, if they can do some prayers. I was so touched and I said yes. This time around, they held my hand and did prayers for my mother for her well being. I was so touched by the whole incident that their warmth and their care brought my stamina, my belief so well advanced that I can tell you today that even 15 years later, the feeling that I felt of the waves, the happiness, the strength that everything is going to be all right, just by the touch of these two ladies, was so immense. I don't even know their name. They don't know my name. And we have no connection. The all connection we had was our parents being ill that day, that night in the ICU room.
Wow, what a touching moment. We just saw compassion come full circle in Nishi's story. She was there for these two ladies, there to hold their hand and pray with them, and then they were there for her. You know, Baba Gurbachan Singh Ji's life was this message of how we can keep opening our hearts like Martin Luther King Jr. or Mother Teresa and become better versions of ourselves. He once said, "A devotee does not flee from the field of selfless service despite all hassles and adversities." Nishi was experiencing her own adversity. She was feeling despair, and yet she didn't ignore the cries she heard.
Yes, Arthiji, compassion is contagious. And when you see everyone as your brother or sister, then it becomes your second nature to do what you can when you see someone in pain. Nishi, even in her own pain, forgot herself. She went to be a support for someone else.
You were just saying that when we see everyone as our brother or sister, compassion becomes our second nature. Well, in Africa, there's a philosophy known as Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. And we've heard this story shared in Satsang about the anthropologist who was with an African tribe. And one day he stuffed a basket full of candies and sweet fruits. And he told a group of children that they would have a race, and the first kid to reach the basket would win all the sweets. But when he yelled, "Go!" all the kids linked hands with each other and ran to the basket together. And they shared all the candies. Now, the anthropologist watching this asked, "Why did you run together? Because the first one to the basket would have gotten all the sweets." And the answer he got was, "How can one of us be happy if the rest are sad?" So, Ubuntu, I am because we are.
Wow, this is so profound. Ubuntu. So it goes back to that connection, that realization that whether we are aware or not, we are all connected.
Exactly. Compassion becomes hard maybe when we feel disconnected, which many people do feel today disconnected, especially since coronavirus and all the physical and social distancing. But as we saw with the buddy bench, the pacemakers, and what happened in that ICU room, compassion is always alive.
Because connection is always alive. And thanks to Satguru Mata Sudikhsha ji Maharaj, who is helping us understand and making this connection really easy. I'll share a quote from Dalai Lama. If you want others to be happy, be compassionate. And if you want to be happy, be compassionate.
So, can you have compassion without connection? Yes, but does connection make it easier? Absolutely. When we see every being as a part of ourselves, coming from the same source, we see the oneness in all life. That oneness, that connection, allows for compassion to flow naturally. thanks for joining us on this episode of Soul Vibes. Until next time, Sant Nirankari.
So